Hi everybody, I've bumped the video that was normally going to appear today to tomorrow, so if tomorrow's video talks about Tuesday, that's why. I bumped it because Stan Lee passed away yesterday at the age of 95, and 95, hey, you're doing something right if you make it to 95, but I had the privilege of meeting Stan Lee 3 times. One in a rather extensive interview at his POW Media offices. We all know how that whole thing ended up, and even at the time, we got the sense that his partner was kind of a scumbag. But that's neither here nor there. We met him 2 other times after that at Comic-Cons and stuff like that. And the thing that struck me first of all is what a positive spin he put on things, no matter how obnoxious the people around him were, no matter, how crazy it got. He always, at least facing the public, was very, very positive. And the people around him, the people who worked for him, people, 60 years as junior, were in awe of his energy, that he liked to work. And, they always talked about how much he adored his wife. And I think that's what, ever since his wife passed away, he's just been he was in declining health. That's one of the great love stories of the ages, worthy of a comic book, that one. I'll recommend a book, I Have to Live with This Guy by Blake Bell. It's about the wives of comic book creators, and they detail not just that story, but lots of creators. But it's a good read. But he was, the other thing, when you were in Stan Lee's presence, what you really got a sense of is how shrewd a mind was behind the shtick. I think you really knew that people expected a certain thing. He never said the word superhero. It was always superhero. And he always had a quip for every occasion. I remember part of the interview was, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Why do the webs come out of his hands instead of his butt? And Stan Lee, without missing a beat, went, well, we thought about doing that and considered it would be unseemly. And it just, obviously he's been asked that before, but he just had a joke for everything. And he, more than any other single person, is the reason that we have all these comic book movies. I don't even think you can call them comic book movies anymore. They are modern action cinema, which almost single-handedly brought back hope to blockbusters. And, after Star Wars became nihilistic and the beefcake cinema of the 80s and early 90s was really focused very much on anti-heroes. Those Marvel superhero movies very much brought back the idea of heroes. And we owe Stan Lee a huge debt of gratitude for that, because he saw that comic books could be movies, which is why the movie cameos were so important. But the other thing that I think gets missed, and I say it gets missed because, you saw the huge media outpouring when Aretha Franklin passed, and that was because of among other things, her contributions to music, absolutely. But it was also her contributions to the civil rights movement that made her such a figure that was considered newsworthy. And I think that we undervalue how much Marvel Comics brought to the idea that, I think this is where I get it from, the idea that justice and criminal justice and social justice should be the same thing. And, there's a reason they separated in talking about it, but these were good guys who fought criminals. But they did it with a nod to, it was the 60s when these Marvel Comics characters were created, most of them. And that is in their lifeblood. Like, that is in the DNA of these characters. That is why they are distinctly different from the late 1930s and late 1940s era created characters of DC. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, they came from a very different place, but there are similarities. I mean, Superman especially, you know, created by people who, I want to be careful about this because people get mad at me, but you know, the Jewish experience in America at both those times was central to this idea of secret identity. Because, you know, some people claim you can look Jewish, some people claim you can't, but a lot of the time people didn't know unless they knew. And this idea that you had a secret that a lot of people at the time felt that they had to keep hidden because anti-Semitism was very real, was really at the core of the idea of, you know, Spider-Man having a secret identity and Superman having a secret identity. And, you know, the fact that they helped everyday people was such a big thing as well, coming out of, you know, crime comics and the noir phase. And then, you know, sort of the idea of heroes or things that do great things against epic struggles and big battles. All of a sudden you had, you know, coming out of the Depression and coming out of the Civil Rights era, regular people being helped by these heroic figures. And it really brought home the idea that little people mattered. And then the idea that the thing the world hates about you can be a great strength as well. You can actually take that and turn it into something that can help people, even if people don't necessarily appreciate that. I know I definitely took that idea to heart. A lot of people see me as a DC girl because I have so much Superman and Wonder Woman and stuff like that. Used to be big into Batman, not as much anymore. Just, I won't get into that now because this is about Stan Lee. But the first comic, the comic that got me into comics, was a Spider-Man comic. And it was, this is really glamorous. It was in the outhouse at my grandmother's cottage. My older cousins had a collection of comic books there, and it was a Spider-Man comic, Amazing Spider-Man. And it was one of those issues where he had a cold. And there was something about the vulnerability of a superhero with a cold. The fact that he got up and superheroed anyway, even though he was sneezing into his mask. Something about that, I not only found it captivating in terms of superheroes, because superheroes were already on TV, you know, with the Super Friends and that dreadfully animated Spider-Man cartoon. So I was aware of it, but something about that, you know, the fact that superheroes had regular problems, that I really connected with that. And I found that not only was that an important thing about superhero stories, but stories in general, something about that just clicked with me. And it stayed with me to this day. And I know I'm not the only one. The vulnerabilities he breathed into his characters. Because, I mean, Stan Lee himself was very comfortable with being imperfect. I remember we saw him at a convention and didn't expect him to remember us. I mean, God, he does so many interviews. Granted, not many with a cigar-smoking sock puppet. Ed's cigar, a lot about Ed, is inspired by The Thing, by the way. Fun fact. But he sees us and immediately goes, "So have I got you thrown off television yet?" Like, just, and everybody, you know, everybody in this big crowd of people looks at us like, who are these people? They must be important and figure. And, you know, that was Stan Lee. But, you know, here's this guy who seemed to sort of float above it all. But I never quite figured out how much of the social messaging was him trying to make a point, and how much of it was just he told stories that mattered to him, and he just kind of assumed that they'd matter to other people. And, you know, he used to say that he didn't think that what he did was very important, but entertainment matters. And as I've gotten older, I've started to think, you know what, I don't think that there's a distinction there. That's an academic distinction that somebody who's coming from a purely, not even artistic place, but the place of an entertainer, that's a completely different mindset, because art is, I'm going to express myself. It's a selfish pursuit. Whereas the mindset of an entertainer is, I am here to entertain you. It's a more giving thing. Like, I don't care what I wanted to do tonight. You guys like this? All right, that's what you get. It's less important that I do what I came here to do than, you guys get your money's worth out of this. And I think there's a nobility in being an entertainer as opposed to an artist that has been lost, because the very fact that, especially X-Men comics, that were so soaked in the DNA of the civil rights movement, the fact that it was so entertaining, and that you could forget that, you could forget or sort of like push down for a while the clear, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. dichotomy with the X-Men, and it's interesting because Magneto, I don't think Magneto was ever intended to be a gay icon, but he became one, just because of the idea of, all the X-Men having the secret, the Jewish identity became resonant with the gay community. And that was how universal Marvel Comics were in that era. This idea that they were going to tell a story about what something felt like. And they were going to use the metaphor of mutants or gamma rays or whatever to convey a general human story, what it feels like to be different, what it feels like to be left out. And then, if what you took from it wasn't actually the intended message, that's okay, because it's here to entertain. If you like it, that's all that matters. If it makes you feel good, awesome. And the dialogue surrounding comics is not that anymore. And I know there are plenty of readers who still come to comics in that way, whether rediscovering it with their kids or whether they're just, adult readers who just want to have fun with them, don't want to get into these online fights or think too deeply. They just want to see, or even if they don't read the comics anymore and they want to see the movies and have the t-shirts and they're a fan of the character, even if they haven't picked up a comic in like 10 years, 20 years in some cases. All that's okay. Stan Lee's vision for the whole thing is that these characters could transfer to TV shows and they could transfer to movies, and people could experience them in the mass market, affordable entertainment of their choice, because that's all comic books were. They were a cheap form of entertainment for, superhero comics were for young men. Romance comics were more for women. But the universality of his concept, and the fact that he started introducing, a multi-ethnic cast of characters, the fact that they had characters like Storm and like Black Panther, and even with the really clumsy elements of, early Luke Cage comics and stuff like that. The fact that they even made the attempt, one of the things that was heavily censored back in the early days of comics, I believe this was in the 50s, was, stories involving Black heroes. There's a famous comic that was censored just because it was about an astronaut, and at the end, the character takes off his helmet and he's Black. That, oh God, in the South, in the US South, no, you couldn't do that. And so the fact that Marvel was so inclusive in so many ways, even with the, the not enough, we need more diverse characters, all that stuff. We can always do more. I mean, characters like Kamala Khan are great additions, but the addition of characters like Storm, of T'Challa, of Luke Cage, of characters like that. I don't know if that. I got the sense that a lot of those things weren't deliberate marketing things or wanting to make a point. I think that just spoke to the extremely open, imaginative, big heart of the people behind them, especially Stan Lee. And there's some people who, still hold a grudge about the Stan Lee Jack Kirby stuff and the Stan Lee Steve Ditko stuff and all that stuff. And that's, I'm a little tired of those debates because they just go on and on and on. It's the same talking points all over again. But without Stan Lee, media as we know it now would not exist. Superheroes have driven movies. Superheroes have driven TV shows. Superheroes have driven video games. And yes, Stan Lee didn't invent the superhero, but Marvel certainly showed that they could be relevant and that they could speak to the issues of the day by coming in just off the mark, by telling them through metaphors. And that wouldn't be the way it is without the vision. And I don't want to use big superlatives that undermine the raw entertainment value of what he was trying to do. Because as I said, I think that's exceptionally important, and I have a ton of respect for that. And that's why when people get into these fights about comics and video games and everything like that, my thought is that, if they actually studied the history of this stuff, if they actually studied the people behind them, they'd recognize in a lot of ways those creators of the Silver Age were already telling stories that weren't being told yet. They were telling new kinds of stories. And I think that because of the work of Stan Lee and the people who have careers because of him, many of them are my friends, I think that it's been one of the few reliable sources of hope and permission to dream of the last couple generations of, Gen X, millennials, and things like that. I think it's been one of the few sources of media that has not been doom and gloom and not just kind of stomped all over any aspirations or any positivity one can have. And no surprise, it was dismissed as crap and became a major media source anyway. So, I just wanted to do my part because there aren't going to be the same kind of cable media tributes, and the world didn't seem to stop with the loss of Stan Lee the way it did for some other people. And so I wanted to stop and I wanted to pay tribute, and at least for the people this matters to, this is here now, and somebody can see this and say, okay, somebody cared, and somebody sort of saw the depth of the achievement without getting too, this is what I need it to be about. So that's it, and that's my piece, and thanks for watching.